Hey folks, it's one of the things that happens when you get a new retro machine. You play around with the software that comes with it, if it came with any, and you eventually get bored of it, and then you hit the net, start looking for more titles. That happened to me when I got my Plus 4 a few months ago. Didn't come with many games, and I got bored of them fairly quickly. And it wasn't until several months later that I took it along with an SD card reader for games to a local Commodore Amiga meetup with some friends. We sat down and just randomly went through the games on the card until we stumbled across a particular title. And that is the C16 adaptation of Kickstart. Now, for C64 owners, the Kickstart games are really fondly remembered and best played with friends. They're the kind of games you can just fire up, you don't have to wait for a multi-load, you don't have to do a lot of things, there's just straightforward options to get into until you're racing away off two-player 8-bit trial style action. Now, when you're thinking of the restrictions of the C16 in particular, what All For Sure Southern decided to do was to do something a little different. And the result? Kickstart C16 goes for arcade thrills over the off-road simulator action that it claims on the cover. Racing through 16 stages in consecutive sequence, your objective is to get through as many as you can, all in all trying to get the best overall score. To add to the challenge, you're up against a countdown clock, which ticks down over time, and you've got 5 lives. Each time you crash into an obstacle, you lose one of those. If you fail to complete the stage before the time runs out, or you run into too many obstacles, it's game over. The biggest area where the arcade feel is most present is with the player control. Starting with the fact that you can jump freely. Unlike C64 Kickstart where you've got to, go over a ramp to jump here, you can pull it off at any time with a quick hit of the fire button, regardless of your speed. Next, there's the speed control. You're not just limited to accelerating and slowing down on the ground, but you can do it even in mid-air. And this helps cement that arcade game feeling. Even more importantly, both that freedom of jumping and freedom of speed control are something you need to master. As there are moments where, in order to get through a series of jumps, of obstacles, you need to be very precise in where you jump, how you control your speed, in order to land at the right spot to have enough time to make the next jump. So at times, it feels more like a platformer than a straightforward racing game. As for the stages themselves, they certainly can be tricky to wrangle through. Obstacles in them range from potholes and fences, to buses, log piles, and eventually weird spiky things and the occasional lightning strike. Along the way, there are balloons floating around the map. Depending on which colour they are, you'll either get points or you might even get extra time. And that comes in very handy on some of the later stages where the time limit gets even tighter. Once you do reach a checkpoint, you get a brief moment to relax as you see your bonus points count up for your remaining time and your remaining lives. Once that ticks over, you'll get a bump in time as well as an extra life, although you can only have a maximum of 5, and then you're on to the next stage. Controls themselves are straightforward, made up of 3 controls: accelerate, decelerate, and jump. All of these are controlled by a joystick or the keyboard for when you don't have any controllers with those little C16 DIN connectors handy. The graphics are simple. They rely heavily on the multicolour capabilities of the TED chip, with a nice mix of colours and shading, especially on elements like the storm clouds, as they'll cycle darker before they unleash their lightning. For me, the sound's a bit of a mixed bag. The title theme I found became really grating after a short period of time, but thankfully you only hear it during the attract mode. Sound effects in-game really suit the game well. There's an engine noise, a crunchy explosion noise for crashing, and various bleeps and bloops, and they all help to evoke the feeling of an early 80s arcade game. The only real issue I do have is some of the level design. There are some early stages in which there's too narrow a field of error with some of the jump. I guess when you're looking at it as a budget game, you kind of need that to extend how much time you're going to get out of the game. Before I give my final conclusion, there's really only one more thing I have to talk about, and that's the homebrew C64 conversion from 2007. Back in the day, the Plus 4 in particular managed to get a lot of unofficial conversions of major titles, simply because other than sprites, there's a lot of similarities between the C64 and the Plus 4. Now, that didn't much so happen with the other way. Other than perhaps a couple of titles recently, most of the traffic went from the more popular machine to the lesser machine. As with most ports, the goal is to bring the game across as tightly as possible, along with being optimised for the C64's hardware and slower processor speed. The result makes an incredibly tight conversion, where even the original cheat mode works. The controls are also spot on, they've been brought over perfectly, although now require a joystick, there's no keyboard swap, which, to be honest, is no bad thing because joysticks are a lot more plentiful in C64 land. Along with that, there have been a few minor bug fixes made to the game, which help with the later stages. All in all, the crew over at Cosine who did this release have done a spot-on job. The graphics have also been brought over well. Although the C64 has a smaller palette than its brothers, it doesn't impose too much of a limitation. Although the lightning clouds have lost out, palette cycling there does not look as good, in my opinion. As for the sound, this is significantly improved. The music is much nicer, the cover is far less grating, and now also plays in game, is not just restricted to the tile screen or track mode. And it makes everything sound significantly less sparse. The redone sound effects I don't feel suit the game as well. They do lose their punch a bit. And in addition, the sounds that play at the end of at the end of the stage where your bonus calculates have been removed, and it takes a little bit away from the arcade feeling. So overall, I really enjoy Kickstart on the C16. I think it's the kind of game you control when you have some friends around. You can play through and, have a game, try to beat each other's score, and you can complete alternating team. It doesn't take a long time to load, it's a fairly quick loader on either machine, and it's the perfect fix when you have a short period of time to sit down and play a game. As for which of the machines you should run it on, it really comes down to what's more convenient. For me, I have my C64 set up the whole time, whereas I pull the Plus 4 out occasionally to play games. So for me, the C64 version is the better pick. If you're in the lucky position that you have both a C64 and a C16 or Plus 4, it really doesn't matter. You've got a great game on either machine. Of course, there are other preferences like, do you have joysticks that will work on the C16 or Plus 4 with that mini-DIN connector, and so on. But if you've only got one, just go with the version for that machine. As sometimes the costs involved in getting a real machine up and running are not necessarily worth the hassle involved. Especially if you're not a hardware collector, if you just like to play old retro games. And that's a wrap. I hope you enjoyed this look at a not so well known interpretation of a classic game. If you enjoyed it, please consider leaving a thumbs up or a comment, and maybe even consider subscribing for more other retro gameplay coverage. Thanks again for watching, and I'll catch you next time.